We need to save.
My name is Peter Hammond, and I am the interim minister at the Stowe Community Church. So if you came through town, it was that white steeple rising above everything around it. Not quite rising above the mountains, but close to it. And on behalf of Jack's family, I welcome you this morning and thank you for coming to celebrate this remarkable life. My friends, we gather here beneath this great mountain, a treasured fixture in Jack Patten's life for over 70 years, and surrounded by these beloved North Woods. We come to remember a life well lived as husband, father, grandfather, publisher and benefactor, veteran and volunteer, pilot and outdoorsman, lover of Labradors and a place named Stowe. We are free to acknowledge our sadness and the emptiness of his absence, but we also remember how Jack always saw the positive and would want us to do the same. So let us make a joyful noise to the Lord all the lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord is God, that he made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him. Bless his name. For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. Let us gather with thanksgiving and in celebration of the life of John Wills Patten. Let us pray. Eternal God, our Creator, in whom we live and move and have our being, never far from any one of us, but most near when we most deeply feel our need of you, reveal yourself to us in this hour as the God who watches over all our ways and can, in every experience, lead us nearer to you. With sadness and with thanksgiving, we gather here today for this time of celebration and remembrance inspired by the life of Jack Patten. Help us to realize that you are the God of the living, that with you there are no dead, and that though he has passed from our sight in this world, he has been more fully received into that holy presence of the world unseen through the power and the love of our risen Christ. Amen. And now I would like to invite Leighton, Jack and Caroline's neighbor, to share some words of remembrance with us.
Peter. Good day. I must say it was an honor to be asked to speak at the celebration of the life of Jack. Not often in one's life will an opportunity like that come by. And I think credit is due to Caroline for the weather she's provided these 2 days, including the full moon. So I have been asked to say a few words about Jack as a neighbor. And saying a few words about Jack is difficult. You know, sort of like putting Moby Dick in a sardine can. It's something that I've tried to keep it short, but I probably will not capture the full person. We have been neighbors since 1994. And I went on to that font of all knowledge, Google, to see what a neighbor is, and they define it as someone who lives next door. I guess I didn't know that before I hit Google. But they also went on to talk about a good neighbor is one who is thought to be friendly, helpful, trusting, trustworthy, respectful, and considerate of noise for the sake of those living next door. Well, that's interesting. But really, all that said, it's really not the Vermont way. I mean, the Vermont way is to act as a good neighbor regardless of where people live, whether they're next door or in the next county. And to accept Vermont as it is, not expect or demand that it should change to be like where people came from, and to be a good neighbor to Vermont itself. And Jack fit that mold perfectly. A good neighbor to Vermont not only takes Vermont for what it is, but takes the time and makes the effort to learn what Vermont is. And in that regard, you've got to learn the culture, what people value and respect, its arts, its social institutions, its actions, and the often subtle ways in which culture operates in a place like Vermont. And then, having learned all that, one must learn to contribute one's talents where and when one can. And finally, not to judge others in a state like this despite their appearance. And Jack filled that mold perfectly as well. And I remember our first meeting, Caroline, I don't know if you do, but my house was under construction just next door. And I was cutting raspberry canes, presenting only in my best Filson briar-proof shorts. Bare belly, covered with sweat, bleeding from above and below my best Filsons. And I looked up, a bit surprised to see a car, because there was no one else up here at that time. It turned out to be Jack and Caroline. And Jack, in his booming way, introduced himself as my new neighbor. He was polite, welcoming. There was no judgment about him, given the way I looked. And at least in my presence, there was no judgment. I don't know what happened when they left. But it was a wonderful exchange. And I remember thinking, I think this is going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. No homage to Humphrey Bogart when I thought that either. But in both times, both homes were built in time. And I would see Jack, and we would see each other on the road. We would see each other in the pasture. And it was immediately evident that he was an engaging personality, because you couldn't come anywhere near him without being engaged in some discussion or other, be it property taxes or listening to a rant about one thing or another. In the early days, it was liberals. That was the target. And I told him one day that a lot of people considered me as a liberal. And there was even one old gent, now deceased, no thanks to his opinion, but considered me Stowe's #1 communist. And I told Jack that, and I got one of those low breathy, ha. And I said, you know, I may try to convert you. And I got another, ha. But as time went on, the ha, when we would discuss things, would become a He was willing to at least listen. And over time, you know, as we talked about things more and more, we talked about everything. There wasn't any subject that was off base. And we found that we were agreeing on more and more and more things. And I asked him one day if he was becoming more liberal or I was becoming more conservative. But we never were able to sort that one out. But, you know, with all of his accomplishments, Jack was a humble man. When you look at all that he accomplished, he had much to be proud of, whether it was family, whether it was business. And I never heard him make mention of any of that when we were in the company of others. Yet, with all that, he was always interested in me and would ask my opinion on world economics. And I would think to myself, why is he asking me? I mean, my world, living and practicing law in Vermont, was a lot smaller than his. But he always wanted to hear what I had to say, and he listened and heard it with respect. And it didn't matter how far off from his opinion it was, he considered it. Now, what else was Jack? Many things. But he was dedicated and involved. And when I say dedicated, he was dedicated with energy and put his whole persona into it. Again, whether it was family, his beloved Dartmouth, I mean, he was always that rah-rah football player. I could hear him over here sometimes talking about bringing in the groceries from my house, as though he were addressing the football team before the game. I mean, it was quite an enjoyable thing. But his understanding and appreciation of Vermont as it is, and as he thought would benefit the state going forward, was shown with his working with the governor over the state of Vermont's purchase and preservation of what was called the Champion Lands. They're now known as the Kingdom Heritage Lands, which pays homage to what is called the Northeast Kingdom in Vermont. And it's 132,000 acres of woods, one of the wildest swaths of forest in Vermont, and it will forever remain intact and undeveloped, and thanks in large part to Jack. But he was also dedicated to his, I guess, would be fourth and fifth children, the Labradors, and even the third child, Deacon, the Labrador. And he would see me in the pasture. I'd be out there with my Brittany throwing bumpers or trying to teach it to come or whoa or whatever was going on. And we would talk about dog training. And that was always interesting with Jack because he had his own way. I offered to lend him some books, but he decided he didn't need them. So I at least tried to explain to him that as smart as Deacon was, he probably was not gifted with the ability to understand the King's English. So that we should try to find a word, a command that was consistently applied and do a little bit every day. So that he did. And from then on, we could hear from May through October out in the pasture, and from November through April on the road, the training with Deacon, with that famous refrain, "Deke, get the F over here." That's true. A lot of times 6:30 a.m. It's an early riser. But some might suggest that was stubbornness rather than dedication. But Deacon, yeah, I'll give the dog credit, was his equal. And I don't know that there was ever a declared winner in that battle. And also, he had a wonderful sense of humor and was always trying to pry stories out of me. And I asked him one day what was his favorite. And he kept, after I told him, he kept asking me to repeat it for him. And I'll share it, it's quick. I was one day in the town clerk's office in Morrisville, and there was a man there named Sid Mander, who was the town clerk. And Sid was a frail, balding man with a Don Amici mustache. Now, for those of you who don't remember Don Amici, he had one like Clark Gable, except a little earlier. And I was rummaging around in some book or other, and this couple came in, heard the door open and close, and dead silence. Nothing happened. And I kept rummaging and rummaging, still dead silence. Finally, I could hear the couple start speaking to one another in a heavy New Jersey accent. And I thought, okay, this will be interesting. And pretty soon, the male of the couple said, "Hey, I'm trying to get a little help here." Sid, without batting an eyelash or even looking up, said, "Well, any damn fool can see I'm giving you as little help as I can." Jack absolutely loved that story. Kept crying it out of me. My favorite story from him took place on the honeymoon. You remember this, Caroline?
I don't know what you're going to say.
Well, I wasn't there, so this is all secondhand. But apparently Caroline cut herself, and there was no first aid kit, in the room. So Jack said that he could speak fluent Spanish and he would take care of it. And he would call down to the desk to see that they sent up some Band-Aids. So he did. He got on the phone with his impeccable Spanish. A few minutes later, the buzzer rang. They went to the door, opened it, and by God, there in the hallway was a mariachi band. That was my favorite story. But through all of this, as neighbors, you know, we learn from one another, I think. And it really transcended neighborliness. You know, it became a friendship, and one that I treasured and valued, and I think Jack did as well. And let me see, this is the final act here. Really a friend, I don't need this, really a friend is somebody who you can share anything with without fear of judgment, and that was Jack. Somebody that you could talk to when things were good, and that was Jack. When things weren't so good, and that was Jack. And I will never forget, I had a tick bite a few years ago that caused me to pass out in the tub. And the first thing I remember was looking up at my lovely wife who said, "They told me to tell you not to move." And I said, "Who the hell are they?" And well, it turned out that the ambulance was on its way. I was going to the hospital. And I remember in the darkness of that October night, while I was in the ambulance, hearing that booming voice outside say, "Hey, you guys, you take good care of him. He's a good man and a good friend." And that was the last I heard until we disappeared in the darkness. But, you know, I guess a word to whoever is taking care of Jack now. He's a good man and a good friend, so take good care of him. We all miss him. Thank you.
Mark McGraw is the son of Jack's oldest friend, I think, if I have the story right. Mark.
Good morning, everyone. As he said, I'm Mark McGraw. I am the son of Marjorie and John McGraw, and I'm lucky enough to be here with them today, with my sister Lynn. My dad was Jack's oldest friend. They were born 3 days apart in the same hospital, in Summit, New Jersey, and they played golf together. They did everything together. They worked together for years and years and years. And I'm here to say a few things. Caroline, thank you for the honor. And John and Jay, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And I have a few memories of Jack that always kind of make me smile. I started working for a little publishing company, the same one that he had worked for, in 1980. And nobody in this room other than Caroline knows it, but Jack was very instrumental in helping me through the trials, for lack of a better term, of having working for a company that I had the last name of the company, so it was kind of tough. And Jack always had wonderful words of wisdom for me. I would see him a couple times a year, and we'd play golf, and always wonderful, wonderful things to say, and it was very reassuring. And I've always called my dad. In fact, Dad doesn't like it when I say it, but I've always called him the wisest man in the world. Well, Uncle Jack was this very close second. He was very, very helpful in my mentorship. There are a few things I would just like to share with you, and imagine that most of them involve a golf course. I think Jack was a golfer because it was something to do when he wasn't fishing. But Jack had he had the ability to make you feel that you were the most important person in the room, and that is very rare these days. We were at a golf course for 3 or 4 days in southern New Jersey, a place called Pine Valley, with Dad and Jack and a friend of mine, Eric Johnson, who was a golf pro out of Pittsburgh. And he was writing a book. Eric was writing a book at the time, and they had Jack and Eric had a mutual person they were doing business with. I think the guy was at Sports Illustrated, and Eric was very inquisitive about how he should go about finishing this book off and getting it published. And Eric asked him, I distinctly remember Eric asking him, so Jack, what do I do? What's the next step? Do I email this guy? And Jack was so taken back by that word, email. He said, email? You go knock on his door. And there you go. So there's some words of wisdom from Jack Patten. You go knock on his door. As my uncle would say, Jack was the last of the belly-to-belly salesmen. He really was. And our days on the golf course were very, very memorable. And he had a little term that, you talk about people leaving a legacy. Well, one of the little Jackisms that I remembered so well is when he'd leave the golf course, he had this little term that I now say, that I've been saying for 15 or 20 years, and because I have been saying it, subsequently all my friends now say it. He leaves the golf course and says, well, thank God that's over. So that's a true fisherman for you right there. My best friend is a fisherman, and he has adapted that line. Thank God that's over. Jack, I don't want to take up any more of your time. Jack, we miss you. I am proud to call Jack my uncle. I am proud to call Jack my mentor, but most of all, I'm proud to call Jack my friend.
We'll hear next from Jack, and Caroline's son, Jamie, is how I've heard you referred to. James, but Jay also.
A lot of names.
Yeah, a lot of names.
We'll break this out. There we go. Well, I thank everyone for coming. It is, I would call it a special day, and in remembrance of my dad, and we're just excited that the weather turned out the way it did here in Vermont. I've been up since Wednesday with Mom and helping Mom, and we wanted to first, as a whole family, thank everyone for coming today. Take time out of their schedule to celebrate our dad and provide my mom with support throughout all this. I stand here to celebrate, as I think Dad would want. He was one for big celebrations, but always said, never be the last one to leave a party. Well, I thought a lot about what to say and how to kind of wrap up and phrase and eloquently paint a portrait of his life, as we've heard. I was thinking of John Wayne. I was thinking of Sean Connery. I threw in Cary Grant, but as I thought about it, all those rolled into one. We'd be here all afternoon. So I thought I would just come up with kind of one word that I thought would sum up what he was to all of us. And I've spoken to many of you, heard many stories, and I chose really this one word, and I think it sums up sportsman. He was a true sportsman in everything he did. He was ready to play, ready to compete, ready to celebrate, and all with a sportsmanship quality. Frankly, there are too many great stories to tell about Dad, and that's probably a good thing. I would reference my dad a couple that do come to mind. When we were in England, he was there for about 15 years, and John and I were both born there. We would go to Richmond Park, the Queen's Park, and at some point, I think John was around 6 or 7, he decided to convince my brother to try to catch a queen stag. I think it was a 6-pointer, and we went into the woods, and he was convincing John he could tackle it, and there was this deer, and I'm telling you, he came so close, and he almost had his head, butted in, but that was Dad laughing, just like, oh, we almost had him, and we'll get him next time. So from that, I moved to when we moved to Greenwich, Connecticut, as a big fisherman. Dad had this great idea of let's all 3 of us get into a canoe and go off Todd's Point in Greenwich. And the gunnels, we were close to sinking. And we're out there, and John and I'm in the middle, and he and John are fishing away, not realizing water's coming over. And lo and behold, Coast Guard comes by. And they just look at us and just nod their heads and leave. And at that point said, this is not going to go well. He loved the athlete. He loved competition. I think he thrived on the fun that the team sports, outdoor activities, golf, the challenges and the contests provided. As I grew up, this was embedded in almost everything we did, whether it was skiing, fishing, hunting, hiking, and yes, team sports. As a small boy, a kick around turned into a game, and if we dropped the ball, we would get a letter, and then Dad would make sure that letter spelled an animal, and if you lost, you had to make the sound of that animal, whether it was a pig, a dog, and he loved it because it became, when you start whipping the ball as hard as you can at each other, it became true sport, and he got a laugh. He was our biggest fan and came to as many games as possible, even flying into regional airports, renting a car to watch us play. We were obviously at prep schools. And one time he came to a game that I didn't play in. I sat the bench. So that whole year my nickname was Bench. Every time I came home, he would reference me as Bench. And then John loved that. He thought that was great. But a few years later, it came back around, as all things do. And John was a freshman at the Dartmouth football team. And he was second, third string defensive end, which my dad was at Dartmouth. And so we went to this game, and John did not play at all either. So Dad decides in his great wisdom, as Mom can attest to go seek out the coach, let the coach know that he was a defensive end in '53, let him know he played in the Michigan game, and then say, hey, I think your defensive ends are rather weak. They were running the ball all around them. So about a week goes by, maybe 2, and then we get a call from John saying, Dad, you won't believe it. They had open tryouts for my position. I'm now 5th string. So the stories are endless. They're great stories. We can go on and on because there really are just so many. But looking at who gathered here today, I think you would absolutely love the fact that we have Hall of Fame athletes. We have collegiate and high school All-Americans here. We've got a Big Ten head coach. We've got high school state champions and league champions. We've got member guest golf champions. We've got an equestrian champion. We have several pilots. And we've got the golfers, hunters, and the list keeps going on. I think to him, he would be laughing. And I think I have to mention, obviously, John McGraw, a childhood friend, who honed the golf game at a young age, playing at Round Hill Country Club and the Gulfstream. Freddie Hibbard, who's here today, who's a ski entrepreneur, and we heard many great stories on ski slopes, at Ski Vale back in '63. And we still have the long headboards in the house that we've never tried them, but Dad says he did ski on them. And then Peter Grant came in, who was a longtime neighbor of ours in Greenwich, and I think Dad introduced him to football when he was at Brunswick School. And he always brought that sportsmanship quality to everything he did. And I think that truly is the right word. Our last trip together, several years ago, John put together a trip to Iceland fishing. Dad had a bad ankle at that point in time, but you'd never know it. We did have to wheelchair him through the airport, which I don't think he appreciated, complaining the whole time he could do it. But we didn't want to miss the flight. But even then, in Iceland, on the fishing streams, he was still trying to catch the biggest salmon, still trying to goad John into missing the one that he just missed, and he absolutely loved it. We had 4 or 5 great days in Iceland. That was very special. I know he'd be amazingly proud of his 5 grandchildren that are all here, as they will get up and say a few words. I would say we should all have as much fun as he did. And again, thank you for making this celebration of life and support for my mom. Dad would be upset we don't have a tea time, but I think he'd be smiling at this event. So thank you.
So we heard about those grandchildren, and I've just heard a little bit about them over the last few days and some of the things they've been up to, and it sure seems as if their grandfather's influence has settled in firmly in their lives, and I'd like to invite them to come up and share some of their words with us.
Hello guys, we are the 5 grandchildren, as you may know, and we all just wrote a little something about our favorite memories with our grandfather, and so Sydney is going to share first.
Hi everyone, I'm Sydney. One memory that really stuck out was the Breakfast Club, and no, not the movie. Grandpa would love to spend time with us, and the Breakfast Club was the perfect way too. As we all were sitting down for breakfast, he would ask us questions, such as, what is the capital of Alaska? And I want you to name all the different kinds of fish. As you probably could guess, we never truly knew the answer. But the person that came the closest would be named the captain for the morning. He would always ask what type of trails we were going on that day. Us being the kids, we never knew. After the day was done and we were having dinner, he would always ask us, how did it go? And we would tell him that either Kendall or Anna had fallen into a hole or hit a tree, which was usual. Everyone would laugh, but deep down I think Grandpa was embarrassed for us. At the end of the day, Grandpa was always so excited to see us and hear about our adventures, because that's the man he was. I'm so grateful that I got to be a part of his life since he has taught me so much.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Dylan. There are truly so many stories and memories that I could mention about my grandfather. I could talk about the countless amount of conversations we shared over skiing, or the countless amount of conversations over Dartmouth being the best school in the entire world. And let's just say he made it very clear that Hobart and Cornell, the schools my parents attended, were just alright. Or as he would say, they're eh. Over the years, if many of you do not know, my grandfather had a big passion for socks. And when I say big passion, I mean a big passion. When we would come up for our annual skiing trips during December and February, the one thing I always forgot to pack was socks. And let me tell you, that was my biggest mistake coming here, forgetting socks. Every morning I would wake up, put my ski clothes on, and walk up to eat breakfast. Not wearing socks, of course. And every morning it would be the same conversation. Dill, where are your socks? Or Dill, your feet must be freezing. However, it would always end the same way. I would, of course, tell him I didn't have socks. And then he would leave the room for a couple of minutes. But he always came back carrying the same things. Socks. He would bring 2 to 3 pairs from his room so that I had a selection, of course, or a choice of what type of sock I wanted. There would be 1, the heavy-duty skiing socks, and then 2, the warm and fuzzy socks, and 3, the nice-looking dress socks, which I never chose. To this day, I will always remember my grandfather as the best sock collector. I will always remember my grandpa as the kind and loving person who was willing to do anything for his family. I love you, Grandpa, and I promise that Kendall, Anna, Sid, Chris, and I will forever carry you with us, whether that's on the field or on the mountain. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Christopher Patten, grandson of Jack Patten. I want to start by saying I'm so lucky to have had 18 wonderful years with such a wonderful man. Those 18 years were full of lasting memories and funny stories. My grandfather was a man of many passions, including skiing, fishing, shooting, golf, hiking, the list goes on. What stuck out to me about him was that he loved to share those passions with other people. I'm sure without him I wouldn't have the opportunity to do many of the things I love to do today. And so in that way, I want to be like him when I'm older. He was also quite the charismatic character. He had a way of brightening up the room. I remember playing the classic name game, as Sydney mentioned, where, for instance, we would name as many fish as we could until we could think of no more. Other categories included football teams, planes, flowers. I wasn't that good at the flower one. I also remember going out to restaurants, and with him, the thing was he went through phases with the restaurants he went to. And so there was a time period where we just went to the Von Trapp Beer Hall for every time. Good food, though. Good food, by the way. But while we were there, he was always cracking jokes, and he was brightening up the room, and he would always be talking to the waiters. And he was putting smiles on other people's faces. And I think it's safe to say that he was a social guy who knew how to read the room. And there's so many stories I'd love to tell about him, but for time's sake, I'm going to keep it short. So thank you all for coming. It means a lot to us that you guys made the trip to celebrate our grandfather's wonderful life. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kendall. I want to say thank you again for joining us to celebrate and commemorate our grandpa, Jack Patten. I mean, there's a ton I could talk about, from when I spent a week up here with Anna, learning to play golf from the hole-in-one master, and conversations about Cornell soccer. And I mean, they weren't technically conversations. It was more so him telling me that Dartmouth was the best and that I should have gone green. But he was one of a kind and had an immense passion for bears, especially brown bears. And the one memory that comes to mind is when we were all up here for a ski trip, and he was talking about the bear that comes and visits the house every morning. He'd had conversations with the bears, and then all of a sudden, a brown bear appears into the window out of our dinner table, and he was like, "Oh my God, guys, did you see that?" And we were like, "What are you talking about?" And all of a sudden, a bear pops up from the window again, walking past, and we were all astonished because we were like, "What is going on?" Later did we know he made my dad dress up in a bear costume, head to toe in the winter, trudging through the snow. But I could go on and on about memories, and this is just the one that always seems to bring a smile on my face, and one that all of us will definitely truly remember. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Anna, and something I'll always remember about my grandpa was his love and enthusiasm for everything outdoors. And as the quintessential mountain man he truly was, he had an endless supply of jackets, snowshoes, orange reflecting fishing gear, trekking poles, walkie-talkies, whistles, bikes, probably 40 fly rods, hiking boots, maybe some GPSs, and an endless supply of dog biscuits for Moose and Bear, obviously. And I think more importantly, this love of the outdoors shined through in the little moments. Like every day when after skiing, he would ask if we got any airtime while bombing down Nosedive, his favorite run. And he was always excited to know about our different adventures, and especially loved to hear about our ski days or hiking trips. Grandpa even went as far to carve out a little hiking trail over there in the backyard with like a little sign that said the Patten Trail. And we would hike down it to like a little pond, of course, with snowshoes in the winter. And being outside has come to mean a lot to me in my life, and I know this mutual love that me and my grandfather shared of the outdoors is something I'll always treasure. And it means so much to me and my cousins and family that you took the time to come celebrate our grandfather's life with us today. So thank you.
Caroline chose a reading that I think some of you will recognize from Ecclesiasticus that speaks to the world that Jack Patten loved so much. Look at the rainbow and praise him who made it. It is exceedingly beautiful in its brightness. It encircles the sky with its glorious arc. The hands of the Most High have stretched it out. By his command he sends the driving snow and speeds the lightnings of his judgment. And therefore the storehouses are opened and the clouds fly out like birds. In his majesty he gives the clouds their strength, and the hailstones are broken in pieces. The voice of his thunder rebukes the earth. When he appears, the mountains shake. At his will, the south wind blows. So do the storm from the north and the whirlwind. He scatters the snow like birds flying down, and its descent is like locusts alighting. The eye is dazzled by the beauty of its whiteness, and the mind is amazed as it falls. He pours frost over the earth like salt, and icicles form like pointed thorns. The cold north wind blows, and ice freezes on the water. It settles on every pool of water, and the water puts it on like a breastplate. He consumes the mountains and burns up the wilderness and withers the tender grass like fire. A mist quickly heals all things. The falling dew gives refreshment from the heat. By his plan, he stilled the deep and planted islands in it. Those who sailed the sea tell of its dangers, and we marvel at what we hear. In it are strange and marvelous creatures, all kinds of living things and huge sea monsters. Because of him, each of his messengers succeeds, and by his word, all things hold together. John.
I'm John Patten, and thank you, all of you, for helping us to make a very special memory today. We really deeply appreciate it. My dad loved making experiences, turning the mundane into adventure. He told wonderful stories about his experiences. He was spiritual, and storytelling his way of knowing God. His narratives were born out of resilience. Dad likely watched every Western movie ever made. In any contest, he always rooted for the underdog. He loved the big reveal under the Christmas tree. And he collected paintings that projected action. These visuals cover just about every square inch of the walls in this house. His personality was a combination of grit and imagination, fueled by enthusiasm and gratitude and a great sense of humor, as you've heard. He could be compulsive. About collecting paintings, he said, I know one thing. Don't stay in a gallery too long. You're sure to buy something. About Westerns, he concluded, you know you've watched a few too many Westerns when you start recognizing the horses. He loved mom, family, friends, and then Dartmouth College's teammates on the football team and his remarkable class of 1953. Most days, at least one article of his clothing was green. All right, one winter in Kitzbühel, Austria, Dad noticed a U.S. skier competing in the Hahnenkamm downhill, wearing a Dartmouth hat, walking up the street to lift alone. We, including my mom, were all transfixed as Dad ran out of the hotel, put his arm around the guy, carried the guy's skis to the lift, all the while pumping him up, let's go, Big Green. My dad's life force came from his many good friends. He could light up a room with poise and humility. Walk in, head up, shoulders square, firm handshake, always a sharp-looking tie, and ask lots of questions. He'd listen more than he would speak. And at least that was his approach to family Thanksgiving dinner. In business, he throttled up a little bit. Consider his European ad sales team from the late 60s for International Management, Aviation Week, and Business Week. Made up of an Englishman who flew a bomber in World War II, a German who spent time in the Hitler Youth, an Italian who was on both sides of World War II, and a Scandinavian who grew up neutral. To bring everybody together, Dad held an off-site meeting in Barcelona at a Spanish bullfighting school, where the salesman discovered that they had at least two things in common. One, bulls, even little ones, are really scary. And two, when you are the one holding the cape, it can really help if you have a strong cheering committee. They all became lifelong friends. Dad went on to lead many great sales teams in New York and globally, and speaking for the family and for those watching on video, we are deeply grateful for all of their correspondence. Dad was great at motivating people. What you want to be today, he said, you'll tend to be tomorrow, and then you will be the next day. And that was Dad's way of saying hunger and determination matter more than talent. Act, he said, don't get caught reacting. And that reverberates even still. The thing is, he'd say very little about his achievements. About his college football career, he talked mostly about his teammates. He could have talked big about being the only sophomore in defense to start, interception he made against UPenn, or playing in the Hurricane game against Princeton in 1950. Those things mattered to him, but outwardly he deflected. And he told a story about a friend saying hello outside Michigan Stadium just after the Dartmouth game. Apparently, Dad was sporting a pretty good shiner. Hey, Jack, there you are. What a great game. We looked everywhere. Where'd you sit? In business, he didn't brag much either. About being the publisher of Business Week, he described the delicate ad-edit relationship this way. Friday, I go to the printer. Sunday, I go to pray. Monday morning, Business Week magazine goes to the newsstand, and my advertisers get to read what my editors really think about them. And he literally once presented a symbolic peace pipe to the Dial Corporation's CEO, one of his key clients. And there was no question that Dad was all in representing Business Week, and he was not above asking Jay or I to please put Business Week in front of Forbes on every newsstand we came across. His life was unconventional. Millington, New Jersey, to Salisbury School in Dartmouth, the U.S. Air Force, back to Dartmouth again, to Chicago, to New York, to Denver, met Mom, to London, to Connecticut, and then here to Vermont. He lived Henry Thoreau's assertion, march the beat of your own drummer, but with a proviso that was uniquely his. Be sure to celebrate your friends' wins in this life, too. He wasn't known for having patience. We grew up on a steady diet of Caroline, Caroline. This has to be the longest traffic light in America. He loved reading biographies. Winston Churchill stood out to him with his gritty persistence. Attitude is a little thing that makes a big difference. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Dad's take on this was a little more succinct. Never give up. And nowhere was this mantra more true than in golf. Playing family golf with Dad was a bit like how Wilbur Wright described flying. More than anything else, the sensation is one of perfect peace, mingled with an excitement that strains every nerve to the utmost. It was an adrenalized blur for me, and writing down scores was like going to confession. Now, I mention Wilbur because my dad loved flying. He loved the discipline of it and the escape, and he had over 1,000 hours, including a stint flying northern Vermont patients out of Stowe to Mass General with Lifeline. How'd you get into flying? I asked him. Well, he'd reply, in Denver, I'd ride my horse, hangover, 5 miles past Highland Ranch and dismount to open a gate. The moment I did, hangover would run all the way back to the barn. I got really tired of walking. And he loved fly fishing, and he pursued it to the inevitable conclusion. At first, you want to catch one, just one. Then you want to catch as many as possible. Then you only want to catch the special one. And then you just don't want to catch any more. He said you savor a life in the outdoors. And then you realize you have a responsibility to protect those wild places. And we see this in his work with the Stowe Land Trust. And Dad absolutely adored dogs. About dogs, Will Rogers said, if there are no dogs in heaven, then when I die, I want to go where they went. Now, given our dogs, Alec, Twig, Smoke, Blitz, Deacon, and Betts were all waiting for Dad up there, we're sure they welcomed him with a mound of lacrosse balls, golf balls, and sticks just waiting to be thrown again. Now, we've heard from Leighton about Dad's iron-like control over his dogs. Thank you, Leighton. To my thinking, his advice on dog obedience was simply this: to bring him back, when all else fails, yell biscuits. And sometimes, though, even biscuits failed, and this is when diplomacy was needed. The scene: a small bed and breakfast in Inverness, Scotland. Mr. Patten, your dog just killed Henrietta. She was my best egg layer. Madam, I can assure you that Alec is a highly trained gun dog who would never think to touch a chicken. A feather dropped from Alec's mouth. A pigeon feather, most likely, madam, but to be on the safe side, shall we add 20 pounds to the bill and call it even? And the dogs always gave Dad the perfect out. I'd really love to stay, but I have to go home and feed the dogs. In his 91 years, our Dad rose up from the Depression, served his country, loved family and friends, and was very proud of the successes in the classroom and on the fields made by his 5 grandchildren. He worked 40 plus years for McGraw-Hill, set a tremendous example, married to Mom for 59 years, traveled the world, and in the end, he and Mom chose to live here in Stowe. He wrote his own future. So today, we are standing in a dream begun 73 years ago, when Dad first visited Stowe in 1948. And it must have struck him then, as we all hope it will for all of you too, to see how the light in Vermont falls down through the trees and on the hills like rain. Fill your cup. Remember those you hold dear, and let's all take a sip. Here's to Jack.
As we come to a close, I'd like to offer a prayer that begins with a prayer written by Walter Rauschenbusch very early in the 20th century. A prayer that feels to me like fitting words for a celebration of Jack Patten. O God, we thank Thee for this universe, our great home, for its vastness and its riches, and for the manifoldness of the life which teems upon it and of which we are part. We praise Thee for the arching sky and the blessed winds, for the driving clouds and the constellations on high. We praise Thee for the salt sea and the running water, for the everlasting hills, for the trees, and for the grass under our feet. We thank thee for our senses, by which we can see the splendor of the morning and hear the jubilant songs of love and smell the breath of the springtime. Grant us, we pray thee, a heart wide open to all this joy and beauty, and save our souls from being so steeped in care or so darkened by passion that we pass heedless and unseeing, when even the thorn bush by the wayside is aflame with the glory of God. O God, our strength and our Redeemer, giver of life and conqueror of death, we praise you with humble hearts. With faith in your great mercy and wisdom, we entrust John Wills Patten to your eternal care. We praise you for your steadfast love for him all the days of his earthly life, and for all that he was and will remain to those who love him. We thank you that for Jack all sickness and sorrow are ended and death itself is past, and that he has entered the home where all your people gather in peace. God of all mercies and comfort, in tender love and compassion, embrace Caroline, John, Jamie, and their families. Be their refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. Now into your hands, O merciful Savior, we commend Jack. Acknowledge, we humbly pray, a sheep of your own fold, a lamb of your own flock, and a son of your own redeeming. Receive him into the arms of your mercy, into the blessed rest of everlasting peace, and into the company of the saints in light. Amen. And we would like to close with some words written by Norman Maclean at the end of his book, A River Runs Through It. It's worth noting that both Norman and his brother Paul went to Dartmouth. Otherwise, we would not be reading this. This passage speaks to the connection that the Maclean family had with the natural world around them. It also speaks of the abiding connection Jack Patten had with the natural world he loved so deeply. Norman Maclean wrote on the last page, "Of course, now I am too old to be much of a fisherman. And now, of course, I usually fish the big waters alone, although some friends think I shouldn't. Like many fly fishermen in western Montana, where the summer days are the almost Arctic in length, I often do not start fishing until the cool of the evening. And then in the Arctic half-light of the canyon, all existence fades to a being with my soul and memories and the sounds of the big Blackfoot River and a 4-count rhythm and the hope that a fish will rise. Eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it." And now may God bless you and keep you. May God's face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May God look upon you with kindness and give you peace. Amen. If you didn't know it already, you are all invited to lunch. And of course, the memories will continue to be shared. Perhaps even some that shouldn't have been shared in this time. But memories that I know you will all cherish, and a life you will all always celebrate. Thank you for coming.
I think we all want to get up and start.